Welcome to video number 1 of how to build Flappy Bird in Unity. Last video we discussed how to find your way around the Unity editor. We added this square to our scene, which we can delete. We can right click it and click delete, and then Control S to save. Again, you can right click and drag to move around the scene. You can also click the scroll wheel and drag to move around, and you can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do to make our Flappy Bird game is to make the actual bird. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new game object. A game object is any object in Unity, any object that you can see and do things with in Unity. So you can click the plus, create a 2D object, sprites, circle. This creates a circle sprite game object. We can just call it bird. And again, you can edit the transform component and change the position to 0, 0. That is the center of our scene. And if we go into our game view, we should see a white circle there. You can change the color to yellow if you want, but you don't need to. I'm just going to do that. And right now, when we hit play, nothing happens. So right now, we need to add 2 components to our bird. And remember, a component basically adds behaviors to our game objects. So you can click the Add Component button. And the first thing we need to add is a Circle Collider 2D, which will allow us to add collisions later. And then a Rigid Body 2D, which will add gravity to our object. So now if we click play, the bird falls. So that's pretty cool. So the rigid body adds gravity, as previously mentioned. So that's like 50% of a Flappy Bird's behavior. However, you can't control him yet. If I click space, nothing happens. It doesn't jump up. So we need to add some code to add behavior, to add more complex behavior to our bird. So the first thing we're going to do is in our assets folder, we're going to right click, create folder, and call it scripts. This is just good for organization. So you should make a scripts folder to put all your scripts in it. Double click to open. Right click, create mono behavior script, call it bird. Hit enter to create it. And then you should double click to open Visual Studio. Alright, so inside Visual Studio, we have the basic Unity template script that we have. So we have a class, which is called bird, and then inside our class we have 2 methods, the start method and the update method. the start method gets called once before the game really does anything. So this is the first thing that gets called when we click play before anything else happens. Anything inside the start method gets called, and then update happens every single frame after that. So, just to further this point, if I want to print hello world, always Control S to save. If I want to print hello world here in the start method, what do you think will happen? How many times do you think it will print out? Let's go and test that. First, we need to actually add the bird script to our bird object, so you can click that and drag it on top. Oop, not drag, not do that. Sorry. I created a new game object. Okay, you want to drag the bird script on top of the bird object. There we go. And that'll add the bird script to the bird object. You need to do that in order to call code. You need to add the script to an object. Okay, so if we click play, how many times do you think the hello world will be called? It's in the start method. It'll be called once when the game starts. Alright. Can clear that message, and that'll be displayed in the console tab. Go back into Visual Studio and put that in the update and save. How many times do you think that'll be called? Well, we go back into Unity and click play. That'll be called every single frame, so it's being called a lot of times. Okay? So every single code that we want for every single line of code that we want for gameplay will be in update because it'll be called every single frame. And every single code, every single line of code that we want to initialize things will be in start because it'll only be called once. Okay. Now we can start coding the actual bird behavior. So first things first, you want to create a public, and this public keyword makes it so that you can see the variable in the inspector. So we're going to be making a public rigidbody variable, a variable of type rigidbody, 2D. That'll be seen, since it's public, that'll be seen in the bird script. It'll be public in the inspector. You'll be able to see the variable in the inspector. So you're going to go public, rigidbody 2D, and you want to call it RB. So this just creates a public variable, again, that can be seen in the inspector, of type rigidbody 2D. We're going to call it RB. And remember, all the code we want to initialize should be in start. So RB should equal to getComponent rigidbody 2D. GetComponent just gets the component of type whatever is inside here. So it'll get the component that's on our game object on the same. It'll get the component that's on the same game object as our script. So this getComponent will get this rigidbody right here and put it inside this variable. And again, because we made it public, we can actually see it in the inspector. So if we save that and click play, the rigidbody, we can see that the rigidbody variable RB gets assigned to this component right here. So the get component works. Alright, now we're actually going to make the bird flap. And to do that, we're going to do that in update, because everything relating to gameplay needs to be an update because it happens every single frame. It's a simple if statement. If input, we're going to use Unity's input class to get user input. If input dot get key down that detects if we press a button. Key code dot space. So if it detects that we press the space key down, we're going to flap. I also want it to detect if the user clicks the mouse button. So and input dot get button down. Oops, sorry. Get mouse button down 0. And 0 is just the left mouse button. Alright, so if we hit the space bar or we click the left mouse button, we want to flap. So anything that deals with gravity has to deal with the rigid body. So we're going to go RB, and because RB is the rigid body variable that we assigned to our rigid body, so that's why we're editing our RB, because that's the variable. RB dot add force Y. So Unity has a built-in method for rigid body called add force Y, which adds a force up or on the y-axis, so it can be up or down. If you input a force of positive, it'll do it up. So the first thing we want to do is actually create another public variable. Public float. A float is a decimal number. Jump force. And we're making it public so we can actually see it and change it in the inspector, rather than putting in a magic number of just a random number, and you don't, like if you put 10 for jump force and you just put 10 inside here and that's not high enough or that's too high, if you want to edit it, you would have to come into the script and change it every single time. If we make a public variable, you can assign the variable directly in the inspector. There's an error right now because we didn't actually finish what we wanted to do, so we won't see it, but there will be a public variable, jump force, in the inspector that we can change whenever we want to edit the jump force instead of coming inside the script and changing the script. So add force requires a float force, which we have, so jump force, and then the force mode. So the first thing we want to do is jump force. That's the float, the force that we want to add. And then we want to go force mode 2D dot impulse. An impulse is just a very quick force, like a jump, so that's perfect for us. And that's really it. So again, if we hit the spacebar and or, this should be an or, not an and, or we hit the mouse button, or we click the mouse button, then we add force, jump force, to our rigid body. This adds it upwards. In force mode 2D, the impulse, again, is just a quick force, like a jump. So now we see we have the jump force variable inside of the bird script because we made it public. If we didn't make it public and we made it private or just didn't include it at all, we wouldn't actually see it. So we need to make it public. Make sure to make it public. So since it's public, we can just edit it directly in the inspector. Let's make it 10 and see what happens. I hit space, we actually get an error. And the reason why we get an error is because the input package isn't Unity's default input system package. Unity has a new input system, but it's a bit harder to use, so that's why we're not using it. You have to go into project settings, player, other settings, scroll down until it says active input handling, and you want to click input manager old. and that should restart uh, the Unity editor. Yeah. Sorry, can you restart again? And you should delete this. Delete in our assets. You should delete this uh, input system thing, because that's our. Oop, you should delete it. Delete. Delete. Okay. Now, when we click play, the bird bounces. Alright, so that's it for this video. I will see you in the next video.